Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Alfred Music's webinar, The Value of Pop Music in Piano Lessons. My name is Felicia, and I will be running everything in the background for our session today. We're thrilled to host today's webinar and hope that it gives you a new perspective on teaching pop music. And now, I would like to introduce you to our presenter for today, Mallory Byers. Mallory comes from a family of musicians and has been running a vibrant piano studio in Los Angeles since 2012. She's passionate about helping students fall in love with music and keeping them engaged in their learning, and she specializes in teaching popular styles and teaching preschool students. She's been featured by Piano Bench Magazine, the Upbeat Piano Teachers, and the Piano Parent podcast. Mallory, thanks so much for being with us today.
All right. Thanks everybody for coming. This is really exciting. So just remember, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A because it's easier for us to keep track of them there. I'm just going to jump right in with a little bit of an introduction. So just some housekeeping. When I'm talking about pop music today, I'm talking about commercially produced music that's intended to appeal to a broad audience. So this can include music from the pop genre, but I'm also using the term generally to mean anything from movie music to hip hop to whatever's on the radio, whatever kids are listening to. That's what I mean by pop music. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is going to be pop specific, but I'm using this term very generally. So I just wanted to give a general definition, a little bit of a state of the union for today in pop. This is the top 10 of the Billboard Top or Hot 100 from this week. I will admit I knew 5 of these songs. The others I had to look up. I do think it's really interesting, especially to look at this top 3. So these top 2 are pretty viral. I think everybody's heard them. But this number 3, if you have not read about why this song from the 80s is suddenly charting in 2022, it's definitely really interesting view at like how pop culture shapes the music that people are getting exposed to. And so that's just something interesting sidebar to look into. It was featured in an episode of Stranger Things, and it has since it's charting higher than it was when it originally came out back in the 80s. So that's kind of cool. Just another snapshot of what I mean by pop music. Here is the top song by the end of the year for the last 10 years, and we'll share this out at the end. If you click here, you can see all of the number 1 hits from the early 70s through now, and it's just really interesting to see how pop music has evolved, and also just looking at the types of things that are really popular. And this is just a fun link that when I send this out, you can click on this and put in your birthday, and it'll tell you what the number 1 song was the week that you were born. All right. So when we think about, before we think about pop music, I want you to think about what would you say your purpose is as a piano teacher? I think before we can start talking about why should we even teach pop music, we need to think about what we're trying to do as piano teachers. I know a lot of us would say things like to foster a love of music in our students, to develop well-rounded musicians, to train technically and musically excellent performers. And I think that pop music has a really important role in doing that. The main arguments you often hear for teaching pop music are it's motivating, it's the music kids know, it gets kids to practice who might be kind of hesitant practicers. But what I want to talk about today is more the actual educational value that I think pop music can have for students. The number 1 thing in my mind is that pop music is familiar. And I'm not just talking about songs that students know or things that they've heard before, but the style of pop music is familiar to students. And so if you are incorporating pop music into your lessons, you're starting with something that's familiar to your students, as opposed to classical music, which to most of our new students is relatively foreign. So when you're trying to teach musical concepts to a student, teaching it from the context of the type of music that they're used to hearing all the time in their everyday lives can be really valuable in helping you to bridge some gaps. I also think it's a really important musical style that well-rounded musicians should be literate in. Most of us try to expose our students to a variety of different styles from different eras. We teach Baroque, we teach classical, we teach Romantic, we teach Impressionist, we teach ragtime. We may not be jazz musicians, but we teach jazz style pieces just to introduce our students to that type of music. And I think we should be doing the same thing with pop music too. And I know a lot of us are. But so, like I said, I'm not just talking about actual pop songs that students might know, but just literacy of the genre in general, knowing different characteristics of pop music and how to play it, how to perform it. Just as a little bit of a sidebar, being able to play pop makes you marketable. Because if you think about it, those of us who perform, most of us are not getting paid to play concertos or sonatas. We're getting paid to play at weddings, to play popular classical pieces and standards pop music. So giving your students that literacy in pop music is really valuable. Pop music is also really effective at developing musical skills. This is going back to what I was saying at the beginning about how pop music is familiar. And if you think about some of the most effective ways to communicate new information, so start with something somebody knows and make that connection. Pop music is meant to be danced to. Pop music is defining characteristic is a strong, steady beat. If you look at all of those songs on the top 10, you've got hip hop in there, you have pop, different even styles of pop. There's a variety of different genres in there, but every single song in that list has a strong, steady beat. So think about in the first lesson that you have with a student when you're trying to get them to feel that pulse, to feel that steady beat. Why can't we do that with a type of music they're familiar with? John Williams has written a ton of great marches. So usually what I do is I'll put on Star Wars or something, or an age-appropriate pop song to help students start to feel a steady beat in a music that sounds familiar to them, as opposed to just playing some sort of, but putting on something that feels familiar to them so they can make that connection that all music has a pulse under it and being able to feel that pulse. Another thing that I think pop music is really valuable for teaching is rhythm. So one complaint that teachers often have about teaching pop music is that the rhythm is complicated. And this is true and it's not. So like I said, a lot of pop music has really strong pulse underneath it. A lot of it's in 4/4. And so it's all got a solid foundation of the beat and a steady rhythm underneath. And then what's complicated about the rhythms is that usually the melodies on top are sung. And so they're not usually easy to transcribe or notate easily. But I think this is an advantage to us because it gives us an opportunity to take these complicated rhythms and show how they fit over that steady beat. Then when you start playing complicated classical repertoire, this is a skill you already have because you've seen how it works in the music that you're familiar with. So I'm going to share an example. All right, so what I love about teaching this piece is that it's something fun that you can teach kids to count their 4/4 time signatures in. Usually what I always start pop music from the bottom. So what I would do first is play the teacher duet part and have students count along with it or clap along with it just to feel that pulse. I'm not even playing the right notes. It's an A minor. Just have them clap along with that. Then they can count the notes, count the rhythms, and then they've got a fun piece that they can play to practice 4/4 time signatures, whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, and that new F they just learned. So that's just starting from the very beginning, something fun. For students, I love using those books that correlate with the lesson books or that are at that really easy level. They're often just really simple arrangements of something, but what that allows you to do is to connect it to what they're learning in their lesson books and sometimes give them something that sounds a little more familiar and a little more fun, even if they're not familiar with the exact piece. The next thing that pop music is really good at teaching is basic harmony. This is another complaint that a lot of people have about pop music and why it's not useful, because the harmonies are so simple. It's often 4 chord progressions and it's really repetitive. But I think what that does is it gives us space to start talking about harmony. We have to start somewhere, right? When you teach reading, or when students are starting to learn to read, they're reading simple intervals in 5-finger position most of the time at the beginning, because we have to start them somewhere. And same thing goes with harmony. You have to start them somewhere. Why not start with something familiar? Pop songs are a really great way to introduce diatonic chords and chord progressions, and to get students analyzing chord progressions in their music. Okay, so let me pull up this piece that I'm going to make you guys look at a lot now. This is my absolute favorite pop song to start with a lot of my intermediate students, just getting them used to this style and these 4 chords. This is Falling Slowly from Once. We're far enough out now that most students may not know this unless they're into musical theater. But what I love about this piece is the really simple chord progression and the really simple melody that is layered on top. So what I mean about the chord progression is that, yes, this is really, really basic C major chords. We've got a 1, 4, 1, 4, 1, 4, 1, 4, 6, 5. Like, it's really, really, really basic. But if you've never talked about chords or harmony before, it's new information, and it's an easy, fun way to introduce it. So we introduce this piece is in C major. Here are the chords, and then here's a simple way to play them to make it sound really cool. So I'm going to keep coming back to that piece for some of my other points. The next thing that pop music is good at getting students to think about is melodies. So the melodies in pop songs are usually really simple in terms of range. What gets more complicated is usually the rhythms. If we're building the pop song from the bottom, so if we start with that steady beat, we add the harmony underneath that with a strong rhythmic foundation, then what we can do is layer the melody on top. Some students are going to want to sing. A lot of students are going to be shy to sing. I love singing, but I hate singing in a one-on-one type of situation. So I would never sing with my piano teacher or with you sitting next to me, but I'll sing in front of a coffee shop or a recital hall. There's something about that one-on-one intimacy that makes it a little bit scary. So what I would encourage you to do is, if students seem interested in singing, or even if they're a little unsure about it, open them up to the idea, show them how it would work, let them do it at home on their own. Don't make them do it for you. It's stressful. So if students really don't want to sing, or if they want to play solo style, then they're going to be playing the melody on the keys. Now, coming back to Falling Slowly, this melody is really simple and it's notated as quarter notes. But if you listen to the actual recording of the song, you'll notice that this C comes a little before the downbeat. And so what you can do if you've already set that solid foundation at the bottom and students are comfortable with the chord progression, I'm going to open it up in my book so I can see it better, is then you use the notation to help you get the notes and the basic rhythm, but then let your ear do a little bit of work for you to get the rhythm of the melody to sound exactly right. It's not a big thing, but if you can explain to students that that's something that they can do, it'll really make playing these pieces a lot more fun for them, because sometimes the complaint when a rhythm has been simplified so that it can be notated at the level of a student is that it doesn't sound like the song anymore, right? So layer from the bottom, start with that steady beat, add the harmony. If it's in the case of a beginner, that harmony is maybe going to be in your part, in the duet part. So start with that first and then have the students layer their melody over the top of that. We've got the notes in a simple range that's easy for them to play, and then the basic rhythms, and then they can use their ear from listening to the recording to help them get it to sound the way they want it to. Another aspect of musicality that I think pop music helps you introduce to your students is structure. So yes, pop songs aren't going to have sonata allegro form, but they do have a structure and a characteristic structure. So having students analyze that structure, here's the verse, here's the chorus, here's verse 2, here's the chorus again, here's the bridge. It helps them start to see music in general as having a structure to it. And so then you can start breaking down their sonatinas with them or their simple ABA pieces. It just introduces the idea that all music has a form, it has a structure, there's a point to it. And then the last thing that I think pop music is really, really good for is teaching musicality. So again, a lot of teachers complain that pop music is boring, that it has the same 4 chords, that the melodies are simple, the rhythms are complicated. But what's really nice about teaching, or another complaint is that if you listen to songs on the radio, it's just loud, louder, loudest. But teaching simple music is a great way to get at those things that when you're teaching more complicated music, sometimes there's weeks of getting the technicality down and learning the notes before you can really start digging into what does it mean to shape a phrase and how can we use dynamics to express emotions here. So coming back to this piece, this song, if you listen to it, it makes you feel things, right? It's very emotional. But if you just play the notes on the page as they're notated, it's very boring. And so what this helps you to show students is that we can take this really simple chord progression. We're just going back and forth between C and F. And this really, really tight, simple melody. It's got like 4 notes in it. But through the use of dynamics and rubato and shaping of the phrases, we can really pull out a lot of emotions from even the simplest music. And what that helps to teach students is that all of their music can be musical. And when they're playing more complicated pieces, they have in their mind what it takes to take those notes off the page and turn it into something that's really beautiful. So for example, if we're playing this piece I just showed you, it's got a really simple melody, really simple left-hand pattern, but then it also has a good example of adding some thirds or some sixths to the melody to make it a little more interesting. There are some notated dynamics, but I go into it a little more in depth with my students about how they're going to use those dynamics to bring out the emotions in this piece, because that's really what this, or how this song feels so emotional. It's that range of dynamics. Another thing that I think pop music is really good for is showing students how to shape a phrase. That's one of the main things that we want our students to be able to do. And the beauty of pop music is that the phrases are sung. So it's really easy to see when the performer's taking a breath. It's really easy to sing it yourself and see when you're taking a breath and how you're shaping that phrase. And so it's a great way to introduce students to these concepts they're going to be using in their other music, but in a way that feels familiar to them. One more piece. So this is from the Alfred's Basic Piano Library Popular Hits Level 4, I believe. This is a Taylor Swift song. It's one of my favorites. She has not re-recorded this one yet, which means she might be re-recording it soon, and it's going to be back fresh in the minds of our students. But what I want to point out in this one is this left-hand pattern at the beginning. So in this particular piece, it's pretty slow. It doesn't go really fast. It's not very fast. I'm not putting the right notes, but it's down here. Anyways, but what that does is it gives you a really good opportunity to start working on that technique of those staccato octaves, staccato fifths. This piece actually comes paired with this book in the method, or this piece in the method book that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. Has that same technique. And then, so does this one. This is another piece at relatively the same level. I would argue it's a little more complicated, but not too much. A student at the same level would be working on this piece, would just take them a little longer. And here we've got the same thing again. So what I'm trying to show there is how we can take maybe one piece that has elements that are useful to translate to the rest of their pieces. So maybe you introduce that musette first, maybe you introduce the Taylor Swift song first, but it's got students working on that technique that they can then translate to other things. We do this in repertoire all the time, but I think that there's a lot of good arrangements of pop music that can also be used in a similar way. All right, so the last thing I wanted to talk about was how do we teach pop songs? I use the same formula for every pop song. So if you're teaching from notation, if you're teaching from a chord chart or a lead sheet, or by ear, or from a YouTube tutorial, you can teach every song the same way. Because like I said, pop songs have that strong, steady beat that's characteristic to them. So start by feeling the beat. Before you start playing any music, just listen to it, feel the beat. And then in whatever method you're using, determine the tonal center and work through the notes in the bass and the chord progressions. Build that first. So if you're teaching a brand new beginner a 5-finger arrangement that's just the melody, that means you're going to play the teacher duet part first so that they can feel the foundation of the piece, the foundation of the song, before they start layering their melody on top. Then the last thing you want to do is add the melody on top. So if we're watching if your student's watching a YouTube tutorial of a pop song, they probably on their own usually start with the melody. I just try to train them to go the other way around. So feel the steady beat, start with the left hand, which is usually where the chords are first. Start with that harmonic bass, and then add the melody on top of that. This works every time. This is if you're teaching from YouTube or chord charts or by ear. If you just go in this order, it makes things really easy for students to figure out. All right, maybe we'll take some time to answer questions. There's a few.
Yeah, we've got one that actually goes really well with what you were just talking about. Veronica
Sure.
asks, do you instruct piano students to learn the hands separately and master them before playing them together?
It depends. It really depends on the song and what they're trying to accomplish with it. Either way, I always have them learn the left hand first, or whichever hand is playing the bulk of the chord progressions, so that they can feel the foundation that the melody is built on top of, because those rhythms for the melody can get complicated, but if they can feel how they fit on top of the steady pulse and the harmony, it makes it so much easier. So a lot of times, yeah, if the melody is complicated and has some weird fingerings or something, I might have them practice that first before they layer it on top of the left hand. Or sometimes I'll just have them learn the left hand first and then add the right hand. In that falling slowly arrangement right there, the right hand is really, really easy. So I usually, unless the student's struggling to read those simple notes in C position, I will just have them learn the left hand first and then add the right hand on top of it.
All right, another one is from Marjorie. She asks, how do you deal with written rhythms that don't match what they hear on the radio or in the movie?
So I always start with the recording. So even if it's not in the same key, I think it's really helpful to know what you're aiming for. Another characteristic of pop music is that it is produced, it is recorded. So there's always the original that you can listen to. So listen to the song first, get it in their ears. If it's a song they know, they probably already can sing it or know how the melody goes. And again, I just start from the bottom with that foundation of the steady beat and the harmony, and then layer the melody on top of that. Sometimes I'll have students read the rhythm exactly as it's written if it's simple. If it's complicated and there's a lot of syncopation, then I mostly have students use the notation just to find the notes. It'll help them to see where it is and then use their ear to help them with the melodies. The reason I have them do the harmony listen to it first and then have them learn the harmony first is you can figure out where the harmony lines up with the melody. So if you think about how a chord chart is set up with just the chord changes written above the lyrics, it helps them to be able to sort of do that mentally, even if they're just looking at notation that doesn't have the chord symbols written in it for them. They can see, okay, these words need to line up with these chords, and that kind of helps them also to figure out that that melody that might not sound quite right.
All right, I've got a comment and a question for you. So first, the comment ties exactly to what you were just saying. Anne Marie shared, she has her students, once they've learned the left-hand chords and are confident, she'll have them say the words of the song so that they can fit them to the beat and the chord progressions, and that helps them with the rhythm of the melody.
Yeah, that's a really good solution too for students that are shy to sing, which in my experience is most students. If your students don't want to sing, they can speak the words. And that really does help. I think the words are the best way to teach the rhythm of a pop song. Is if a student knows how it goes and they know the words, they can say the words or sing the words, then that's the best way that they're going to get that rhythm for the melody. because most of the time, especially when we're talking about younger students, the rhythm of a melody to a song that might even be really simple harmonically is going to be beyond what they're used to reading most of the time. So I would never approach rhythm usually first from reading the rhythm if it's complicated.
So then I have a lot of people asking questions about the music in particular. So some people have asked where that Falling Slowly, what book that's in. And then I also have people asking, are there any piano duets? What books you recommend? How do you find music for people that's at the right level? So maybe if you want to talk to repertoire, that would be great.
Sure. I think the easiest thing, I can show some things that we have on alfred.com and then just sort of talk about how I might approach other things that you might not be able to get notation for. So the first thing I'm going to say is that most of the brand new songs that your students are coming in asking for, you're not going to find a good arrangement of them just because of the way publishing works. And so those I usually approach from ear or something like that. What I do use notation for is what I sort of got at earlier, that it's not even necessarily the exact familiar song that's going to resonate with the student, but it's the style in general that feels familiar to them. I also think there's a lot of value in us teaching the evolution of popular music and some of those standards. Again, things that you're going to play at weddings and songs that have stood the test of time. I mean, you saw how that song from the 80s came back. So the first thing I would recommend for little students are these popular hits books. This is where the Iron Man came from. It was from this one. This is for very, very beginners. It starts with pre-reading and then goes into some basic 5-finger position with simple intervals. So I would definitely recommend those for students that are just starting out and are still in method books. Falling Slowly is actually in a few of our collections. I was playing it from this book, The World's Most Beautiful Music. This is my favorite pop collection. It's really great for sight reading and just having a bunch of really pretty pop pieces that you can play. If you are playing gigs, it's easy piano, so it's easily sight readable for a teacher. But it's perfect for intermediate students and up. I love this book. I give it to a lot of my students. It's really popular with my teen students because it's just, a lot of it's going to be songs they don't know. Like not every student is going to know Killing Me Softly, but again, it's got that familiar style that makes it interesting and feel interesting to students. Another one that I like to use is this one, and it comes in 2 levels. So the big note level is going to be for late elementary, early intermediate students. I'll put together a list maybe that we can send out in the follow-up email, Felicia.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
These, so that people don't have to be scrambling to write things down. But Timeless Popular Classics comes in late in a big note and then in a easy piano version. And this is a lot of songs that for the most part have really stood the test of time. So these are good ones to introduce the pop style. Again, if I'm teaching something that's new, I often won't teach from the notation because of just the time it takes for something to go from being like, by the time something gets published in a book that's just a brand new, fresh off the press book or a song, sorry, it's a lot of times not in fashion anymore just because of how music turns over so quickly. So in terms of teaching from notation, I always try to stick to pieces that have stood the test of time or that maybe I think are going to stand the test of time, things like that. Are there any other questions?
I've got one more question for you, and then maybe we share the poll out too.
Oh, yeah.
The question here is from Sue, and she asks, does this method encourage playing more by ear since they're listening to the soundtracks and less by theory and actual written rhythm?
I'm assuming she's talking about my method of teaching a pop song. And I would say it's a combination of both. And the reason I say that is because it works however you're approaching a piece. You can approach a pop song completely by ear, building it up that same way. So feeling the beat first, figuring out the harmony, and then playing it on ear, playing the melody by ear over the top, or singing the melody over the top. So you can do it without any notation at all. You can do it from a YouTube tutorial. You can do it from a chord chart. So that would get them thinking about what key it's in and the chords in that key and the chord progressions. So you've got a little bit of that harmony theory that you're working on there. You can do it from a lead sheet, which would have them looking at the harmony, but then also sight reading through the melody. Or it also works if you're working from something off of notation. So another example, so this one was fresh in my mind with the recent Funny Girl revival on Broadway. But this one, if you think about Barbra Streisand singing this song, if you play this straight, it's not gonna work. It's the melody is something that you have to really take a lot of liberties with on this one, but it has the same solid foundation. So I would have students learn the foundation, read through the notes and intervals. There's a lot of funky chords that are fun to work through and some inner voices. So this is a really good one for sight reading. But that doesn't mean if they're just sight reading it, I'm not having them use their ear at all. Especially in something like this, I would have them listening to the recording. And after they've sort of sight read through it, think about places that they might take some liberties in the rhythms or where they might incorporate some rubato, things like that. So the ear is always involved, I think, when you're playing pop music, but you can use as much notation as you're comfortable with. So if you're not comfortable teaching completely by ear, you can be teaching from a score, but the student's still going to be using their ear. So it's really up to you how much notation and counting out and clapping rhythms. I would just not discourage, but I don't think counting and clapping the rhythms of a melody to a pop song based on the notation is the best way to approach it. It's never going to sound quite right, and it's going to be harder than it needs to be. I do think that using the words and using your ear based on what you know from the recording is the best way to approach the melodic rhythms in most pop music.
All right. So for those of you who didn't get a chance to see it, I know there were some issues with mobile devices not showing the poll, but we asked two questions. And so we asked first, do you enjoy listening to pop music? And second, do you think that pop music is a valuable part of piano lessons for all students? So I'm going to share this, and if I do it right, hopefully everyone will see the results. Can you see them, Mallory?
I can. That's encouraging. I think more of us like listening to pop music than we usually admit, especially as classical musicians. And hopefully, even those of you who don't like listening to it, hopefully you've seen some value in why it might be important to be teaching it to our students. All right.
All right. I have one question that came in that, Mallory, I'll ask and I'll leave it up to you.
Okay.
Susan asked if you would demonstrate what you're describing about changing the melody from what's written, like in that Funny Girl piece. And I will put a little caveat in there that if you do want to play it, the music goes in and out a little bit over Zoom. So please feel free to play it. But for those of you listening, it may not be a perfect quality to hear, but it might give you an idea.
Okay. maybe, let's see. It's kind of hard to show you exactly what I mean by without playing you the recording of the song first. I'm actually going to show you with Falling Slowly because it's really simple and hopefully the audio won't kick out too much. But if you listen to this song, so this is how it's notated exactly. So that last whole note on C is notated on the downbeat of measure 4. If you listen to the recording of this song from the movie or from the musical, you'll hear that almost everybody sings this last word just before the downbeat. And so what I would have a student do is just use their ear to place that note where it is in the song. Another place in this one, where if you listen to the recording, you'll hear something a little bit different. So in this bridge part, games that never amount to more than their worth will play themselves out. It's notated just like that, just with an A there. If you listen to the original recording, he actually sings out. And so what I might have a student do there is add that extra note that they heard that's not on the score. Does that help?
I think so.
Okay.
The last question we have, and then I'll let you kind of take it from there, is Veronica asks, is that piece, and honestly, I can't remember which one she was referring to when the question was asked, but she's asking about an online PDF version that's able to be used in Google Classroom. So maybe, do we have repertoire that would be available digitally?
Yes. On alfred.com, anything that's available digitally says right on the page. So this one is not. So there's a variety of different ways that the music might be available digitally. It might be as a PDF. It might be, or not a PDF, but it might be as like print on demand. It might be as an ebook or something. But anything that has this available digitally, it means there's some sort of digital version of that book available. Okay, so you'll see available digitally either on your search results or on the page. You can see what types of digital versions are available. Sometimes it's going to be ebook, sometimes it'll take you to total sheet music for that type of thing. All right, well, I'm done a little early, but that's not usually a bad thing, right?
Early is always okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you, Mallory, for presenting for us today. I hope that we at least gave you something to think about, even if we may not have changed your mind. Maybe you have something to think about. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.